I spent the entire night sewing my daughter Zuri's wedding gown, stitch by painstaking stitch, without even pausing to rest my weary eyes. Each needle carried a memory, every thread a silent promise, as the clock's steady tick marked the hours like the slow unraveling of my own life. When the first morning light fell across the white fabric, the gown looked radiant, not with the glimmer of a designer boutique, but with the warmth and devotion of a mother who had given everything and still believed in the power of love. My hands trembled as I wrapped it carefully in an old sheet and carried it to Zuri's home. She was surrounded by friends, laughing over coffee, looking every bit the perfect socialite. For a moment, pride swelled in my chest, then it shattered. She glanced at me, her eyes cold, and asked, "Is that the dress?" I nodded, unwrapping it slowly as if unveiling a treasure. Her look of disdain cut deeper than any blade. "This looks like something a poor person would wear," she said, tossing it into the trash before I could even respond. "I'm not getting married dressed like a seamstress, Mom." I felt the air leave my lungs. I said nothing, simply gathered my broken pride and walked out before my tears were noticed. The sun beat down, but I felt only a chilling emptiness, each stitch I had labored over searing in my mind like an open wound. I thought of the countless sleepless nights, the years at the old sewing machine my mother left me, the calluses on my hands, all the sacrifices I had made so Zuri could have her life. And I wondered quietly when love became something to be rejected rather than cherished. Back home, I sat in front of my sewing machine staring at it for what felt like hours. Its familiar whirring sound, once a comforting rhythm of my life, now seemed like a mournful lament, echoing the ache in my heart. Yet somewhere beneath the sorrow, a tiny spark of resilience lingered. I would rise from this pain as I always had, stitch by stitch, like the life I had painstakingly built. I touched the petal, seeking comfort in its delicate vibration, and felt something unexpected. A cold, sharp calm that wasn't sadness but a quiet strength, the kind that arrives when a heart breaks and decides not to crumble but to act. Days went by without a word from my daughter, no apology, no acknowledgement. I learned from others that her designer gown had arrived from Paris, flawless and perfect in her eyes, yet lacking the soul that only a story stitched with love could hold. One afternoon I went to her house, waiting until she left, and quietly slipped inside. The air was heavy with the scent of perfume and fresh flowers, but there in the corner the trash can remained. Among the crumpled papers and scraps of fabric, I found my dress, wrinkled, stained, humiliated but whole just like me. I held it close, breathed in its memory and brought it home. I spread it on my work table, watching the sunset light illuminate every thread. That dress, I realized, would not end in the trash. Night after night, I shut myself in my studio, barely eating or sleeping, pouring my soul into it. I embroidered crystal flowers along the hem, added vintage lace, and with each stitch I wove in my history. One stitch for every tear, one thread for every sacrifice, one flower for every day I had been invisible. As the gown transformed, so did I. I was no longer the mother who bowed to scorn. I was a woman reclaiming herself, learning that love doesn't mean enduring everything but choosing what is worth keeping. When I finished, the mirror reflected determination instead of sadness. The gown shimmered beneath the lamp, carrying more than beauty, it carried justice. On the wedding day, though I hadn't planned to attend, I felt compelled by self-respect. Wearing a simple cream dress and my hair pinned neatly, I walked with steady, confident steps, each one a heartbeat of renewal, each breath a silent declaration: I am no longer the same woman. At the Grand Magnolia Ballroom in Charlotte, music and laughter filled the air, champagne glasses clinked and flowers sparkled. Zuri, radiant in her imported gown, didn't notice me at first, and I waited, hidden near the door, letting the weight of what was to come settle. That night she would not only have a wedding, she would face a lesson. When the clock struck 10, I stepped forward into the center of the room, every nerve alive, every heartbeat a proclamation of my strength and newfound resolve. The murmurs in the ballroom fell silent, every eye turning toward me. Zuri looked up and her smile vanished in an instant. In that moment, I realized that life had been preparing me for this very scene, that sometimes a mother's love is shown not through tears or words, but through a gown that shines brighter than shame. Needles had been my closest companions since I was 12, when my mother first taught me to sew a button. From that day on, my hands could speak what my lips never could, telling stories through fabric and thread. When my husband Kofi died in a construction accident, I was left alone with Zuri, only 6 years old, and a sewing machine that became both my tool and my solace. That first night I cried, but by morning I was sewing again, weaving a promise into every garment. My daughter would never go without, she would always be cared for. We lived in a tiny apartment behind the neighborhood tailor shop where I worked, with scraps of fabric scattered around, and Zuri would make little dolls from the leftovers. For years I stitched other people's dreams into their wedding gowns, their silks and laces that I could never afford, imagining one day I would make something for my own daughter with nothing but my love. When Zuri turned 15, I managed to buy her a brand new dress, sky blue with a white ribbon I embroidered myself. That night, watching her dance and whisper in my ear, "You are the best mom in the world," I felt every sleepless night and calloused finger had been worth it. But those words, once warm and comforting, now echoed like a sad memory, a reminder of how far she had drifted from the world we had built together. The love I had poured into her slowly fading into distance as she grew up and moved toward her own path. She had gone to college in the city thanks to a small business loan I managed to secure by selling my old car. She worked tirelessly, advanced in her career and met new people, but when she returned home she felt like a stranger. Her voice had changed, her demeanor too. She no longer said, "Mama," only "Mother," and there was an unmistakable mix of irritation and shame whenever I spoke. At first I doubted myself, but the signs were clear. Missed calls, fleeting visits, and that cutting remark one day, "I wish you had been able to get an education." Those words pierced me, revealing that the love I had given all those years no longer seemed to matter in her world. Yet when she announced her wedding, I felt an innocent joy, believing I could finally gift her the dress I had dreamed of sewing for decades. I spent hours selecting fabrics I could afford, soft ivory lace, delicate tulle and tiny pearls left by a client, and poured every ounce of love into every stitch. Hidden in the lining, I sewed a piece of my own wedding dress, a quiet message that even if she didn't see me, I would always be with her. But when she rejected it, throwing it in the trash, it wasn't just the gown she discarded. It was my story, my love, the invisible thread that still connected us. That night I sat awake, staring at the silent machine, thinking of my mother who had taught me, "Daughter, women like us don't have swords or fortunes. Our strength is in our hands." And I realized that my strength wasn't in being accepted, but in continuing to craft my own destiny, even when it was disregarded. I ran my fingers over the stained fabric I had rescued from the trash, feeling the pulse of my love within it, and understood that humiliation, if endured with patience, could become a lesson. In the following days, my sewing shifted from an act for her to an act for myself. Every stitch healed, every thread restored a part of my spirit. I was no longer just making a gown, I was stitching my freedom. And though Zuri didn't know it, I had a plan. On her wedding day she would wear her chosen dress, but everyone would remember the one she had rejected. The day dawned gray, heavy with the sense of a coming storm. I dressed carefully in the modest outfit I had worn to my mother's funeral, styled my hair simply, and carried the restored gown in a white linen bag, folded with the precision of a secret kept. It was not a gift nor a grievance. It was my statement, my quiet triumph, and the beginning of reclaiming my own story. It was my quiet response, a silent message to a daughter who had forgotten what it means to love without shame. When I stepped out of the house, the wind whipped around me, tugging at my coat and clutching hands as if trying to pull my heart along. The bus ride to the event center felt endless, each turn bringing memories of laughter shared, of hugs freely given, of moments when we were inseparable, moments that now ached deeper than any needle ever could. The ballroom was magnificent, gilded columns rising like monuments, a ceiling that seemed to scrape the heavens, lights sparkling, flowers fragrant, tables immaculate, perfect in appearance yet hollow. I paused at the entrance, watching the laughter, the clinking glasses, the photographs being taken, and there she was, radiant in her imported gown, flawless yet cold, a smile frozen as our eyes met. Before I could approach, a woman, likely the groom's mother, stepped forward with a strained politeness, directing me to wait at the back. Her judging gaze, sharp and silent, reminded me of every moment I had been measured and dismissed in my own life, and I obeyed, blending into the shadows like a ghost at my child's celebration. During the ceremony, no one acknowledged me. Zuri never introduced me, and I was simply a background figure, a memory she preferred to ignore. I watched her dance, the applause ringing through the hall, my own hands trembling, not from sadness but from restrained fire as I recalled the years I had held her up, taught her to rise, sewed her first dresses and exchanged my tears for her hope. I realized she hadn't forgotten, only buried the truth too deep to acknowledge, and I chose to stay to observe, to understand at what moment my child had seemed to slip away. A young bridesmaid approached timidly, offering assistance. "Just observing," I replied softly, my voice calm, carrying no anger, only the weight of long-held sorrow. When midnight arrived and the music drowned all chatter, I rose, stepping toward the center of the ballroom. The gown rested in my hands and the room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. Zuri froze, color draining from her face. "Mom, what are you doing?" she whispered, uncertain. I met her gaze and said, "Please sit. I've come only to return something that belongs to me," holding the white linen bag aloft. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd, louder this time as the moment I had waited for finally unfolded. Some guests whispered, others simply froze as I opened the linen bag with care and lifted out the dress. The same one Zuri had scorned, once dismissed as a poor person's gown but now transformed. Under the ballroom lights, the tiny crystals I had embroidered by hand caught the glow, and the restored lace shimmered like it had been touched by angels. It was no longer just a dress. It was a crown in fabric worthy of any queen. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Zuri stepped back, tears brimming, and for the first time in years, the weight of judgment was not mine to bear. "What is this?" she whispered, trembling. "Your dress? The one you threw away? But it's beautiful." I held it calmly and said, "Yes, I transformed it just as I transformed myself. You discarded it but I did not. Some things a mother never abandons even when they are despised." The room seemed to hold its breath. I raised the gown high, letting every eye see it. "This dress wasn't made with money," I said, "but with sacrifice, with sleepless nights, with years of refusing to give up. Every thread carries my story. Every stitch carries my name." Zuri covered her face, whispering, "Mom, please stop." I shook my head gently. "No, daughter. I stopped when you felt ashamed of me. Today I didn't come to complain. I came to remind you where you come from." Then a ripple of applause began, soft, hesitant, then swelling as bridesmaids, guests, even the groom's mother joined. Zuri sank to her knees, crying, and I approached, cupping her face in my hands. "There is no shame in humility," I whispered. "The shame is in forgetting who taught you to fly." She nodded through tears, trying to embrace me, but I stepped back. "Not yet," I told her. "Not until you understand what it truly means to love." Holding the gown, I walked toward the door through the mounting applause, each step a farewell, each glance a stitch sealing old wounds. Outside, the night was quiet, the moon a pale lantern, the gown glowing in its light, carrying more than fabric. It held truth. Back at home, I hung it before the mirror, magnificent and untouchable, hiding within its folds the silent letter of a mother's love, a testament that dignity, like a dress, is sewn stitch by stitch, even from pain and betrayal. Inside the lining of the gown, hidden between layers of tulle and lace, I had sewn tiny handwritten notes, folded scraps of paper carrying pieces of my story, fragments of her childhood, and my heart. In one I wrote, "When you were born, I thought life had given me back what it had taken. I never imagined that love could also hurt when given too much." In another, I reminded her of the first dress I made with worn fabric but hands full of hope, unaware that one day she might be ashamed of the love that sheltered her. In the last, smallest note, I included my mother's words. "The thread that binds a mother and daughter is never broken. It stretches until one learns to let go." I didn't know if Zuri would ever find these notes or have the courage to read them, but I stitched them anyway, believing that words sown in silence could bloom when spoken ones fail. Days passed, and the wedding became the talk of the town. Neighbors congratulated me, others whispered out of curiosity, but I stayed in my studio, quiet and focused. Then 3 days later, Zuri appeared at my door, pale and worn, carrying the gown in her hands. She sat where she once waited while I sewed her uniforms, her voice broken. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked, and I simply nodded. She admitted she had opened the dress and found the notes. I could see her vulnerability. The confident, cold woman from the wedding was gone, replaced by the little girl who had once trusted me completely. "I didn't know," she whispered, "how much you did for me." I lowered my gaze. "You didn't have to know. Mothers don't count the stitches. We just sew." Tears fell and she knelt beside me, holding my hands as if no years had passed. Forgive me, she said, and I shook my head gently. You don't need forgiveness. You need to learn. Silence wrapped us, warm and heavy, as she rested her head in my lap, and for a moment, the weight of her childhood returned, soft and fragile. Later she asked if she could stay for a few days. I smiled and agreed, adding playfully, but you'll have to earn your keep, sewing, sweeping, cooking, living. That night we shared a quiet dinner, the silence now comfortable, even necessary. Zuri watched me with new eyes. I always thought you were weak, she said. Now I see you were just tired. Yes, daughter, I replied, smiling. Love can tire you too. The next morning, while she slept, I carefully placed the restored gown in a wooden box, knowing it held more than fabric. It held reconciliation, understanding, and the enduring thread of a mother's love. That I didn't preserve the gown as a trophy, but as a testament, a proof that even the most fractured bonds can be mended if one has the courage to face the scars. Before closing the box, I tucked in one final note. When you read this, I may no longer be here, but remember, humility is not inherited. It is learned, and you, my daughter, have already made the first stitch. I carefully placed the box in the closet beside my threads, needles, and the remnants of the sky blue fabric from her 15th birthday dress. Everything that had shaped my life, everything that had once defined me, now rested in that quiet corner, and for the first time in years, I felt a profound peace. Not the forgetfulness of oblivion, but the serenity of someone who had sewn her soul back together, leaving the wound visible yet whole. The days Zuri spent with me after that were unlike anything we had shared in years. Breakfasts, conversations, even comfortable silences became our new routine. I sewed in my studio while she sat by the window, sometimes awkwardly threading a needle, laughing through tiny pricks, and slowly reclaiming the girl who once adored my homemade dresses, no matter how simple they were. But peace, like all things, is fragile when old wounds still exist. One afternoon, as we washed the dishes together, the phone rang. Zuri answered, and her face changed immediately. It's Amani Ellington, she whispered, her husband's mother, the same woman who had looked at me at the wedding as though I were invisible. Zuri listened quietly, nodding nervously, then hung up. She's coming for dinner tomorrow, she said. She wants to talk to both of us. My mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. With me? I asked, steadying my voice. His mom. She said it's important. I straightened, setting my resolve. Then let her come, I said firmly, but let her come with truth, not just manners. That night I couldn't sleep, not from fear but from an unsettling premonition. There was something about Amani Ellington that felt familiar, something I couldn't quite place. I spent the hours cleaning, polishing silver, and preparing a simple dinner, not to impress, but because good manners are never lost even when others ignore them. At 8 o'clock the doorbell rang. Zuri opened the door to an elegant woman in a coat, her perfume overpowering, trying to mask something deeper. Good evening, she said without truly seeing me. Good evening, I replied calmly. We sat at the table. At first no one spoke. Zuri faked serenity, though her hand trembled on the napkin. Amani toyed with the silverware, avoiding eye contact. I waited, patient and still, knowing that the truth sooner or later has a way of unraveling itself. I suppose you don't remember me, Amani finally began, her voice hesitant. No, ma'am, I replied, calm but firm. But my memory never forgets the voices that wound, and yours at the wedding was unforgettable. Zuri pressed her lips together, uneasy. The woman sighed and lowered her gaze. You are right, and that is exactly why I came. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking clock. Then she spoke again. Years ago, when I was young, my mother had a seamstress. A woman who sewed better than anyone I'd ever seen, and she charged almost nothing. I was arrogant and careless, demanding miracles, making her wait for hours and sometimes not paying her at all. Then one day she disappeared from the shop. I later learned she had been widowed and had a little girl. My heart skipped. What are you saying? I asked. Her eyes glistened. That woman was you. For a moment time stopped. I remembered the old tailor shop, her young face, her jewelry, her sharp, demanding voice. Yes, I whispered, mostly to myself, it was her, the woman who humiliated me over a single stitch and let me go without pay. I knew, she admitted quietly. On the day of our children's wedding, I recognized you in the ballroom, but shame kept me from approaching you. It weighs heavier than gold. Zuri's eyes widened. You worked for her, Mom? I nodded. Yes, daughter. And it was from her words that I learned never to let myself be humiliated again. Amani lowered her head. I came to ask for your forgiveness, Afia. I've carried that guilt my whole life. I thought money made me better, but seeing you with that dress in your hands at the ballroom made me realize I had spent my life admiring what I could never have, dignity. Zuri's lips trembled as silent tears fell. I inhaled deeply, looking at the woman who had once caused me so much pain, and for the first time I didn't see an enemy. I saw someone who, like my daughter, had been trapped by pride. Forgiveness is not asked with words, Mrs. Ellington, I said gently. It is shown through actions. She nodded. That's why I'm here. I want to help. Help you do what? Asked curious. Open your own studio, she said. Zuri looked at me in surprise. With your talent you could teach other women. I can provide the capital, not to clear my conscience but to create something meaningful with what I once used to humiliate. Silence fell. Part of me wanted to refuse, to say forgiveness can't be bought, but another wiser part told me that accepting help can also be an act of self-respect. All right, I said finally. I accept, but on one condition. Anything, she replied. The studio will carry my mother's name, Hope. Because that is the only thing I never lost. Zuri stood and hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. Mom, I can't believe it. Believe it, daughter, I said with a smile. Life doesn't always give revenge, but it does move in circles. And sometimes when the wheel turns, seamstresses teach queens how to mend their souls. Amani nodded, crying softly. You're right. In the end everything settled. The very next day Keziah brought her mother home from the hospital, and a week later, once the noise and gossip faded, she returned to Savannah with Kenzo and Kalia, back to her bakery and the life she had built with her own hands. She never spoke to the Street Claire family again, only hearing distant rumors that Zenobia had left town after selling the house. Their business reputation had collapsed, Soraya had filed for divorce, and Xavier had spiraled into his own troubles, but none of that belonged to her anymore. In her apartment above the bakery, Keziah quietly placed the old diary and the mirror photo into a box and stored it away on the highest shelf, choosing not to destroy them but to leave the past where it belonged. That evening, after tucking her children into bed, she deleted her ex-husband's number from her phone without a second thought, then stood by the window, looking out at the lights of her city and feeling a deep sense of calm and freedom. Her journey came to a close not with revenge, but with peace, showing how one harsh judgment and silent betrayal can ruin a life, yet also give birth to strength, courage, and self-respect. Keziah did not just endure pain, she turned it into protection for her children and fairness for herself, proving that standing up for the truth even publicly is not cruelty but justice. Perhaps the most powerful lesson was the unexpected unity between two women once seen as rivals, who found common ground against the same source of harm, reminding us that allies can appear in the most unlikely places. This story leaves us with a question worth thinking about. Is open, planned cruelty more dangerous, or is quiet betrayal that hides behind silence even worse? Keziah's answer was clear. She chose growth, dignity, and a future built on honesty, and in doing so she truly won. I rose slowly, feeling no anger at all, only a quiet sadness, the kind that comes when life reconnects paths once torn apart by pain and resentment. When I asked why she had waited so long to speak, she answered calmly that forgiveness only makes sense when the time is right and when you can face the person you hurt with honesty. Zuri stood up, visibly shaken, and mentioned her husband's father, but I gently stopped her, explaining that the past choices of adults were not hers to carry and that her father's story belonged to me alone. For the first time I hugged her, sensing that a long, painful chapter was finally closing for all of us. I told Mrs. Ellington that her apology had been heard, but that moving forward was not about easing guilt. If we opened the studio, it would be to guide other women toward purpose and self-worth, not regret. Later that night, Zuri asked if everything I endured had been for love, and I told her yes, not only for her father but for her too, because a mother's love asks for nothing in return. As she leaned against me, I understood that true justice often arrives quietly, bringing peace through truth rather than revenge. A week later, when emotions had settled, a letter arrived from a lawyer, my name written so carefully it made my heart pause, reminding me that some stories continue even after silence. With Zuri beside me, I opened the envelope slowly, realizing that the past still had one final truth waiting to be revealed. Kofi's words on the page felt alive, as if he were speaking directly to me across time. Afia, he wrote, if you're reading this, it's because something I couldn't fix in life has finally reached you. I never knew how to ask for forgiveness with words, but you always understood silence, and I trust you'll see what I couldn't say. I didn't give you an easy life, but I hope what I leave now is more valuable than money. The truth. Inside the small brown envelope were documents for a modest account he had built honestly, meant for Zuri and me so we would never have to rely on anyone's mercy. And then there was a journal worn and full of his handwriting, sometimes messy, reflecting his thoughts written over many years. It held everything he hadn't said aloud, everything he learned watching me love, even when love wasn't returned, and every stitch of life we had shared. I stood still, absorbing each word, feeling Kofi reach me from beyond his mistakes and regrets. Zuri held me close. Mom, Dad loved you, she whispered. Yes, I replied, tears held back. He just never knew how to show it. As I opened the brown envelope, I found the journal's pages filled with our memories. Our first meeting, my laughter in the studio, the way sewing made him feel at home, then darker entries full of guilt, fear, and his struggles to be enough. In the last pages, written during his final days, he left a final message. If you ever feel alone, Afia, look for the red thread. It's in the drawer of our old house with the studio fabrics. That thread was the first you used to sew Zuri's dress. I kept it. It reminded me why it was all worth it. It's the only thing that still connects me to you. That night I couldn't sleep. I found the old box of antique fabrics, and there it was. The red thread, the same one I had used for Zuri's christening gown and my own wedding veil. Holding it, I finally felt the quiet, enduring presence of Kofi's love. I held the red thread between my fingers, tears streaming quietly, feeling the weight of all my years in that single strand. It was as if my life, every joy and sorrow, was woven into it. Zuri stirred at my crying and found me on the floor with the box open. What is it, Mom? She asked softly. I showed her the thread. Her expression softened instantly. Dad, she whispered. Yes, I said. He kept it all this time. Zuri hugged me tightly, and in that moment I understood that love, even imperfect love, leaves signs, small breadcrumbs in a dark forest, and it takes courage to follow them. A few days later, Amani came by the studio, flowers in hand, her face worn but gentle. I came to help with the contract, she said. I shook my head. It's not needed. The studio will open, but this time on different terms. Different? She asked. Yes, I replied. I will open it not out of guilt or charity, but out of dignity. I shared Kofi's letter and the story of the red thread. She cried softly. He wrote to me too, she admitted, but I never read it. Then read it, I told her. The dead leave their truths behind until someone listens. The day the studio opened, sunlight filled the space. Neighbors from the West End came, some with scraps of fabric, some just curious. Above the door a sign read, Hope Studio. Every stitch tells a story. Teaching these young women to sew, I remembered my mother, my years of struggle, my hunger and silence, and for the first time in decades I felt real pride. Zuri, apron on, moved among the students, helping them thread needles, smiling at me. "Hey, Mom." It all started with a dress thrown in the trash. I shook my head gently. No, daughter. It started long before that, with a mother who never stopped sewing, even when life tore the thread from her hands. That afternoon, before closing, I framed the red thread and wrote beneath it, "In the end, all wounds close if you have the courage to hold the needle with love." Hanging it on the wall, I realized this thread didn't just connect fabrics. It connected generations, stories, pain, forgiveness. It linked me to my mother, my husband, my daughter, and all the women who stitched their destinies with wounded but unbroken hearts. That night, I read Kofi's journal one last time. On the final page, in faded ink, was a line I hadn't noticed before. Love is not always sewn with thread. Sometimes it is sewn with patience, and sometimes with the quiet hope of being understood in another life. I closed the notebook and turned off the light, a tired but peaceful smile on my face, finally feeling understood. Years have passed since that wedding, since the night when pride and love met and dignity overcame silence. Today my hair is completely white and my hands are marked with small, fine scars, traces of time that tell stories of dresses, tears, and mended hopes. Though some days feel heavy, my heart has never felt lighter. Hope Studio is still open, a place where women arrive with broken dreams and worn fabrics, thinking they are useless. With patience and care, they learn that even the most damaged things can be shaped again. What I sew now isn't just fabric, I sew hearts. Each morning, sunlight pours through the windows over shelves of colorful fabrics, mixing with the smell of cotton and fresh coffee, and the laughter of young apprentices fills the air. I sometimes close my eyes just to savor the sound, a melody of work done well, of life rebuilt. Zuri has been helping me for 3 years, teaching embroidery to beginners, pricking her fingers sometimes but always smiling. I often think of the red thread Kofi spoke of, the invisible one, still connecting us, tying together what I once thought lost. On many mornings she kisses my forehead and says, "Mom, I learned that sewing is praying with your hands." I smile, remembering my mother saying the same thing to me. Love has turned cycles into blessings. One Saturday as we tidied the studio, a young woman arrived with a 10-year-old girl, holding a torn, stained piece of white fabric. "Do you teach sewing here?" she asked shyly. "We teach how to start over," I replied, welcoming them. As I showed them the tables and machines, the girl's eyes were drawn to the framed red thread on the wall. She walked over and asked, "Can that thread also be used to sew dresses?" I smiled gently. "No, little one. That thread is for sewing things you cannot see." "Like what?" she asked. "Like broken hearts," I said. She looked at me seriously, and for a moment, I saw Zuri at her age reflected in those eyes. Time has a way of returning what we once lost, often in a new form, to teach us how to care for it better the second time around. That night as I was closing the studio, Zuri came up to me holding an envelope. "Mom, this came for you," she said. The sender was the Black Women's Entrepreneurial Coalition. Inside was a neatly handwritten letter. "Afia Bakery, we have followed your work at Hope Studio. Your story has inspired countless women. We want to honor you with an award for your dedication and for showing that dignity can be stitched together, one seam at a time." Below it was an invitation to a city event. Zuri hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You deserve this, Mom." I shook my head, smiling softly. "No, daughter. We all deserve this." On the day of the event, I wore my best dress, a simple cream-colored gown I had sewn myself. Zuri insisted on joining me, and stepping onto the stage I felt the years of pain slowly loosen like tangled threads. Before me were women of all ages, mothers, daughters, young and old, each with their own stories of hardship, silent sacrifices, and resilience. I took a deep breath and spoke. "I am just a seamstress. But over the years, I have learned that no fabric is so damaged it cannot be repaired if you work with patience and faith. And the strongest thread is not the one that shines, but the one that endures." The applause that followed reached deep into my chest. Stepping off the stage, I spotted Amani Ellington in the audience, holding a bouquet. "I knew you would achieve this, Afia," she said, smiling. "No one does anything alone," I told her. "We move forward only when we learn to sew with the hands of others." Later that evening back home I found Zuri on the patio with my granddaughter, Nia. The little girl was playing with a piece of red thread. "Look what I found in the studio, Grandma. Can I keep it?" she asked. I studied the glowing thread in her tiny hands and nodded. "Of course, my love. But promise me you'll take care of it." "Why?" she asked. "Because that thread connects the women of this family. When you hold it, you are never alone." Nia wound it around her wrist and giggled, while Zuri looked at me with tears. "Do you think she'll understand someday?" I nodded. "She will when she faces her first heartbreak. Then she will know that the red thread isn't just a symbol, it's an inheritance." Over the years the studio grew. Women traveled from other towns, some having never held a needle. Many carried hidden wounds, a betrayal, a loss, a hurtful word from childhood. Every time they arrived, I gave them the same advice. Take an old fabric and start sewing. It doesn't matter if the thread breaks. I'll show you how to rethread it. Sewing isn't just about joining pieces. It's about seeing that mistakes leave patterns, that scars, like those on our hands and hearts, are proof of lives lived with courage. One winter, Imani fell ill and Zuri and I went to visit her. She lived alone in a large, quiet house and welcomed us wrapped in a blanket, her gaze calm. "I knew you'd come," she said. "I wanted to say goodbye." I took her hand. "You owe me nothing, Imani." She smiled weakly. "No, Afia. You saved me from myself. Never forget that." Turning to Zuri, she added, Your mother is one of those rare women born once in a century. Her strength isn't harshness, it's her way of surviving. A few weeks later she passed away, leaving a modest donation to Hope Studio, enough to keep it running, and a small note in shaky handwriting. Thank you for sewing with the thread of forgiveness what I had torn with pride. I cried, not from sadness but relief, knowing we had each played our part. Years later, I watch Nia laughing on the patio as she learns to sew with Zuri, carefully handling the red thread she discovered that night. Her clumsy hands prick themselves, but her smile never fades, and I realize that this is the truest inheritance I can give her. From my rocking chair I see life as a fabric. Sometimes torn, sometimes stained, but always reparable. I have been a seamstress, a wife, a mother, and now a teacher. I sew not just fabrics but tears, stories, and hearts. Love isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence of those who keep sewing despite everything. I think back to the night my daughter called me poor and threw my dress away. If someone had told me then that it would lead to this life, I wouldn't have believed it. Now I know that wounds are not meant to destroy us. They let the light in. This is my final story, the last stitch I make with these hands that now tremble, but I am not afraid. Zuri and Nia will continue the work, sewing with the same red thread, preserving a legacy of love, hope, and dignity. When the world judges them for simplicity or generosity, they will remember. The strongest stitch is made by someone who has cried, someone who knows how to hold a needle with love. I close my eyes, letting the quiet envelop me, the red thread warm in my lap as if alive. I almost hear my mother whisper, "You can rest now, daughter. The last stitch has been made." When people ask if I would live through it all again, the humiliations, the tears, the sleepless nights, I always answer yes. Every wound taught me to sew stronger, every insult taught me not to beg for love, and every sleepless night reminded me that dignity is the garment we must never lose. My hands bear the story of all women who, like me, learned to sew not for pleasure but out of necessity, mending clothes, hearts, and families. We waited for respect, not applause, and understood that value isn't measured by money. Hope Studio remains open, and every time a needle pierces fabric, life whispers that nothing was wasted. The red thread still runs through generations, linking loves, stories, and lives. Did you enjoy the story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked it, you can support me with a super thanks so I can keep sharing stories like this. Thank you for your support. I can't wait to read your thoughts. On the screen you'll see 2 new life stories I recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next life story with love and respect.